Good day, class. You are welcome back to Nursing 345 Nursing Research. This is the 5th session, and here we'll be talking about how to formulate research objectives and questions. Research objectives and questions are important. We mentioned at the beginning that you need to be curious about something. That curiosity is what gives you the question, and that is what starts the research. So it's important that we talk about them. And so by the end of this session, I expect each of you to be able to explain research objectives, the questions, and hypotheses. I also expect you to be able to explain how to write research objectives, questions, and then hypotheses. In this session, we'll be talking about 3 important areas: formulating research objectives, formulating research questions, and then formulating research hypotheses. You can get this material from the chapter 8 of Foundation of Nursing Research, and then chapter 5 of Criswell. So let's start with how to formulate research objectives. I want each of you to be able to look at this picture and explain or interact with yourselves about what research objectives are. As you can see from the picture, it looks like objectives are running down from some kind of a hill or a mountain, into a flat surface, which seems like water. What does that mean? So the picture indicates that the research objectives gives you the content of the research. So if you don't have the objectives, it's difficult for you to come up with the content. Research objectives are written in an order of importance because they indicate the scope and importance of the research problem, and so should be stated as such. They should also be stated in such a way that if somebody is reading your research, the person will be able to tell how the data would be analyzed and how the findings will be presented. Research objectives should be stated using action verbs such as identify, establish, describe, determine, estimate, develop, and compare. And I'll just give you one example. So for instance, an objective could be to identify the problems of nurses at the bedside. That could be an objective, or to establish the problems of nurses at the bedside. So why are they important? Why is it important that we have research objectives? The research objectives are so important because they project the content, as you saw in the picture, project the content of the research. Without the objectives, it will be difficult for you to even know how to organize your literature. It summarizes what the study hopes to achieve and creates a link between the problem statement and the purpose statement. The objectives are able to narrow down the study specifics so that you can manage it well. Or put in another way, we talked about the purpose in the previous session. Objectives are the breakdown of the purpose. You break the purpose down into manageable portions. Then objectives can also guide the study onto the right path. Onto the right path because you want to have the right content for the research. Now let's talk about how to formulate research questions. What are they at all? What are research questions? A question that brings about the curiosity in you. So research questions are the specific questions researchers want to answer in the research, or the specific areas that you want to tackle in your research. Why are they important? Why are they important? Why must I have a question before I start this research? Research questions are important because they give you so many directions. The questions can direct the purpose of the study or how the purpose should be written. We talked about the various formats or ways of writing the purpose. So the research question can direct which way you should write. The questions can also direct the kind of theory that you want to use in your research. At your level, we do not insist that you use a theory because you do not have enough time to do the research. However, at the graduate level, it is a must that you would use a theory. And so, if you don't have a research question, that will be difficult for you to come up with. It also directs the sampling strategy that you use and then the methods that you will use to collect your data. So this is an explanation of the previous. Now let's talk about research hypothesis. Research hypothesis. What are they, or what is a research hypothesis? A hypothesis is a tentative statement that the researcher makes. It's a statement of the researcher's expectation, a statement about the relationship that you wish to establish between variables. And so the hypothesis is able to predict the outcome even before you have your findings. And that is why you need to test to know whether you are on the right path or not. Sometimes hypotheses are also translated from the questions. So the research question, if you have the research questions, you can translate them into hypotheses. Now, the three that we are talking about today are very interrelated: objectives, questions, and hypotheses. You can translate the objectives into questions and translate the objectives into hypotheses. So research hypotheses, are written in the following, or this is just an example. I have one example of the question and then one example of the hypothesis. What is the relationship between the reading habits of clinical nurses and knowledge development in nursing? That is a question. And I'm saying that you can translate that into a hypothesis. And that is an example. There is a positive relationship between habits of clinical nurses and knowledge development in nursing. That is a hypothesis. It's a hypothesis because you are predicting a relationship between the two variables. So it's the same question that you have translated into a hypothesis. Now let's talk about some features of research hypothesis. Testable research hypothesis, states the expected relationship as we saw in the previous example. Occasionally, some hypotheses do not predict the relationship. And this is an example. Clinical nurses who have first degrees are more likely to have good reading habits. So it is a hypothesis stated in a different way, or stated in a way that does not show a relationship. Clinical nurses who have first degrees are more likely to have good reading habits. Now, hypotheses should also be based on sound, justifiable rationale. You have to be able to justify why you have stated your hypothesis in a particular way. If you are predicting that clinical nurses who have first degree may read better than those who do not have first degree, you have to justify why you say that. A good research hypothesis is worded, in clear and concise language. This one means that you don't want to cause any confusion to the reader. It has to be simple so that anybody reading it would understand. It should also be worded in the present tenses. If you write your hypothesis in past tenses, what you are saying is that the research has already been conducted. Now let's talk about the different types of research hypotheses. We have simple hypothesis, which expresses an expected relationship between one independent and one dependent variable. Now, an independent variable usually will come before the dependent variable, and they are all measurable. You measure the effect of the independent variable on the dependent variable. Now, a complex hypothesis, predicts a relationship between two or more independent variables and two or more dependent variables. Then we also have the null hypothesis, which states the prediction that the researcher hopes to reject. And I will give you an example of that soon. Then we also have the working hypothesis, which predicts what the researcher hopes to support. Now, just one example each of the null and working hypothesis, because that is what you will be dealing with in your project works. For null hypothesis, is usually stated this way: there is no relationship between reading habits of clinical nurses and knowledge development in nursing. So that's what the researcher is saying. And this is what the researcher doesn't want to support. The working hypothesis is the one the researcher wants to support. And so the researcher is saying that there is a positive relationship between the reading habits of clinical nurses and knowledge development in nursing. I hope you have noted the differences between the two. So in summary, today we have talked about 3 important properties of research, which are the objectives, questions, hypothesis, and then I tried to give you examples of each. In the next session, we will discuss literature review. These are your references for further reading, and then I will see you in the next session.